Today, we're looking at the biggest reaches of the 2024 NFL Draft. Just like last video, the biggest fallers in the draft, I'm going to put up a graphic on the screen to explain the criteria for this list, so feel free to pause and read through real quick. But if you don't really feel like doing all that reading and you just want to hear about the biggest reaches of the draft, then join me in the next section. Let's get into it. But real quick, before the video starts, this video wound up being way longer than I expected, over an hour long, so I'll be doing the top 10 reaches in this video and then 10 more on my second channel instead of doing them all here. Now to the video. First up, we have the massive 6'8", 350-pound offensive lineman from the University of British Columbia, Giovanni Manu, who found himself at 337 overall on the consensus big board, which is 80 spots after the last pick in the draft. However, in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions would make history when they selected Manu in the 4th round at 126 overall, making him the first UBC player ever selected in the NFL Draft. In fact, the Lions actually traded up to draft Manu, sending a 2025 third-round pick to the Jets in order to move up. According to the consensus big board, this was a reach of a whopping 211 draft picks. Why did consensus have him so low? Well, first, there's obviously level of competition concerns. The UBC is a member of the U Sports League, which before Manu only had 14 players who were taken in the NFL draft and 41 players who ever found their way onto an NFL roster. For reference, let's compare this to the FCS, where the first knock on many of the players coming from there is their level of competition. Jackson State, an FCS team, on its own has had 43 players drafted in the NFL, which is almost 30 more than the entire U Sports League, and has had around 100 players on NFL rosters as a whole, which is 60 more than the entire U Sports League. So you can see the questions about this level of competition. Second, even at that level of competition, Manu was considered an extremely raw player and a developmental prospect. So as a 23-year-old rookie, Manu will have to make a huge jump in competition while also improving on his basic technique, which will make becoming a starter in the future an uphill battle. But despite consensus viewing him as a priority UDFA, NFL teams were actually super interested in him. Manu reportedly had 10 visits scheduled in 10 days with teams. The interest is likely due to his tools. He had an RAS score of 8.84, putting him as the 162nd best tester at offensive tackle since 1987, out of over 1,300 participants. His weight of 352 pounds is 98th percentile, his height is over the 85th percentile, and he has good arm length at 34 3/4 inches each, putting him in the 70th percentile. So in favor of him, he has the size and athletic testing, along with a reportedly incredible work ethic. Given these things and the interest surrounding him, perhaps the Lions were right to trade up to get him and to take him earlier than consensus. Maybe Manu could be the next Jordan Mailata. I'm rooting for him, but with a difference of 211 draft picks between NFL and consensus, he has to be on this list. Next up, we have a name that could no doubt come with some kind of cum joke or donut joke, but I'm gonna take the high road. And by take the high road, I mean I'm too lazy to come up with a joke. Just think of one, make yourself laugh, and then attribute it to me. Anyways, it's Maryland offensive lineman Delmar Cum, who was It's Delmar Glaze, who was ranked 150th overall on the consensus big board, a 5th round pick. In the NFL draft, he was taken in the 3rd round by the Raiders, 77th overall, resulting in a consensus reach of 73 picks. The Glaze master was a very love him or hate him type player apparently, as if you look at the big boards that make up the consensus big board, you'll see some extreme highs and lows. For example, CBS was glazing Glaze, as they had him as the 71st overall player, meaning that the Raiders actually got value with this pick. On the opposite end of the spectrum, PFF had Glaze as the 257th best player, meaning that he would have been a reach of 180 picks. Those in the media who were not high on Glaze pointed to a variety of issues, including oversetting, struggling against inside counters, pocket range, and run blocking. There were concerns with his footwork and hand usage, and even when he did manage to put those together, there were further concerns about his play strength. So overall, it just seemed like there were a variety of issues that kept media analysts from liking him this early in the draft. Maybe they just prefer chocolate donuts, or donuts with cum. But there are a lot of things to like on the Raiders side. For one, Glaze is really young and has a ton of experience. A rare combination. At only 21 years old, he's played over 1,000 snaps at each tackle position and has collected over 1,400 pass blocking snaps alone. On those snaps, Glaze had the 7th best pressure percentage allowed, only allowing a 2.8% pressure rate, and had the least blown blocks with only a 1% blown block rate. Pretty surprising given his last name, but I digress. Glaze is also seen as a player with a lot of versatility. Even Glaze himself said, quote, "I don't really have a position. I'm comfortable anywhere they plug me," end quote. This versatility clearly was valued by Raiders GM Tom Telesco, who stated that Glaze has, quote, "a lot of versatility. We see him as a tackle right now. He's got some possible guard in the future maybe, but the flexibility is really nice for all of these guys," end quote. So it seemed that Telesco liked Glaze to potentially fill in at their hole at right tackle this season, but then after this season, when they find like a better pure tackle prospect, they could move him to guard or something, because Glaze was widely considered somebody who'd probably be a guard in the NFL. Glaze actually did spend some time at guard at the Senior Bowl, where he reportedly impressed. Telesco and the Raiders clearly see Glaze as someone who can start at multiple positions for them. If they're right and he plays to the level of a starter, he could definitely be worth this pick, and if not, consensus may have just been right. Our next player is Florida State cornerback Renardo Green, who is ranked on the consensus board at 107 overall, a 4th round pick. In the NFL draft, he was selected in the 2nd round, 64th overall, resulting in a consensus reach of 43 picks. In my initial research, I think I uncovered why consensus was so low on him. Apparently Green isn't a human, he's actually a dog. When the Niners tried to draft him, he begged them, reportedly telling them 15 times, "He's not a human, he's a dog." But he wasn't able to convince them, and they took him anyways. FSU and 49er teammate Tatum Bethune also begged the Niners not to draft him, confirming that Green wasn't crazy. He's literally just a dog, and he shouldn't be on the football field, man. He should be with a loving family. I mean, I don't know how the draft process didn't uncover this. It's so obvious now looking back, he's literally a dog. But the Niners refused to listen, making Green the first canine to ever play in the NFL. Pretty cool. In all seriousness though, Green was named as the biggest reach of round 2 by Mel Kiper, and generally wasn't put any earlier than 100 on consensus big boards. Consensus analysts pointed to the fact that Green only had 1 career interception in over 40 career games, and that interception only came when Malik Neighbors slipped during one of his routes and the ball went right to him. On top of that, he didn't really have any high-end athletic traits, and he didn't really have the traits that are usually needed to play his style of football. Green is a physical press man cornerback who's an enforcer in the run game and is willing to make tackles. All cornerbacks need agility, speed, and mirroring ability, but a high-level press cornerback generally has great size, arm length, and strength. But he's only slightly above average in height, and his weight is really low, which could lead to him losing at the catch point and failing to finish tackles. His arm length is also below average, lessening his margin for error in press coverage. Alongside the low interception numbers and concerns about how he'll play his role in the NFL, there are further concerns that he's just too grabby in coverage, which may lead to a lot of penalties. But as to the 49ers perspective on this, there's also a lot to like. As mentioned, Green is a physical guy who doesn't back down from Oh, I get it now. That's what they meant by dog. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. I was wondering why they drafted a dog. Man, I thought we were about to get Air Bud up in here. He's also excellent in man coverage. Of cornerbacks with at least 300 coverage snaps, Green had the highest PFF man coverage grade in the entire NCAA with a 90, and quarterbacks only had a 56.3 quarterback rating when targeting him. But it wasn't just this past season, as Green has 17 PBUs in the last 2 seasons, and he's only allowed a completion percentage of 54.2% for his entire collegiate career. The Niners also really liked his versatility, as they believe he can play both outside and inside. So on the Niners side, we have the advanced stats and the intangibles, and on the consensus side, we have the measurables and the poor fit between the measurables and his playstyle. And now we'll move to our next player, LSU interior defensive lineman Mason Smith, who is ranked 90th overall on the consensus big board, a 3rd round pick. In the NFL draft, he was selected by the Jags in the 2nd round at number 48 overall, resulting in a reach of 42 spots. Smith has an interesting story, as he's a former 5-star recruit who was seen as a potential 1st rounder entering this most recent season. He had played in 7 games in his freshman year and put together a pretty solid campaign, racking up 4 sacks and 12 hurries on 206 pass rushing snaps, while mostly playing out of position as a defensive end. He also had 12 run stops and 5 tackles for loss. 2022, his sophomore season, was supposed to be his breakout year, as he was an excellent athlete who was just a project because he needed time to figure out his technique. But now he had that time. Well, 22 was, interesting. You see, in the first game against FSU, Smith tore his ACL after celebrating a tackle for loss made by his teammate only halfway through the first quarter. He had only played 8 snaps and his season was already over. But no matter, as his breakout season would just be shifted over to the next season, no biggie. In 2 early mock drafts, he still showed up often as a potential 1st rounder, and he was pretty high on consensus big boards going into the 2023 season. But then the season played out. He wasn't terrible, I guess, but he didn't even reach modest expectations. On 345 pass rushing snaps, he he'd get 2.5 sacks and 18 hurries, and on 236 run defense snaps, he'd manage 4.5 TFLs and 13 run stops. For consensus, he started to fall down boards. The development just wasn't there, as many consensus scouting reports labeled him as a project or as a boom or bust player who had the traits and the upside to one day be a good player, but he was just too risky, because in 20 college games he hadn't really shown that much development, and his play was just far too inconsistent to take high up. On top of those concerns, there was concerns about his durability. As mentioned, he missed the entirety of 2022 with an ACL tear, but he also missed a significant amount of time in 2021 with a shoulder injury. So all in all, consensus viewed him as a risky player with a lot of upside. But risky players with high upside are exactly what Trent Baalke specializes in. Come on, man, this is the Balkster we're talking about. The old Balkan Peninsula never shies away from traits. I mean, this guy was handmade to be a Jaguar. His 6'5 and 1/8 height is 93rd percentile, his 85-inch wingspan and 35-inch arms are 95th percentile, and he's got the ah in his name like Baalke does. You know, the ah, like the double A's. One would suffice, but it's so nice you just gotta use it twice. And Baalke did use it twice, using his second round pick on his second straight LSU player. And by second straight LSU player, I'm not talking about their sexuality. He took 2 in a row. Alongside the traits, the Jags recently hired Matt. It's not a home, it's a house. House was the defensive coordinator for LSU while Smith was there, so he knows him well, and Baalke stated that House reportedly spoke very highly of Smith. So there's both sides. We move on to Texas interior defensive lineman T'Vondre Sweat, ranked as the 72nd overall player on the consensus big board, which is a 3rd round pick. In the NFL draft, he was selected by the Titans in the 2nd round at number 38 overall, resulting in a consensus reach of 34 picks. We talked about Sweat a bit in the draft storylines video, but there were clearly some reasons for concerns off the field, but not in the usual way. Usually when we talk about off-field concerns, we're talking about some guy being a huge asshole or something, but Sweat's kind of the opposite, being known as a jokester, but maybe too much. As before this recent college season, he had earned the label as a party animal, and many criticized him for not putting in enough effort into developing his game. But he broke out in 2023, his 5th year, shedding the allegations of him being unfocused, and developing as both a pass rusher and run defender to become one of the nation's best interior defensive linemen, earning All-American and All-Big 12 honors, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, and the Outland Trophy, given to the nation's top interior lineman. And after his breakout season, he went to the Senior Bowl and also played super well, leading to his draft stock going up further. There was some slight concern at the Senior Bowl because he refused to weigh in, so many thought he was having a difficult time maintaining his weight, with reports that he had even gotten up to 400 pounds in the offseason. Obviously, if that were true, that would reflect poorly on his decision making and conditioning, but he weighed in at the combine a month later and all was fine. I mean, he did weigh in as the 2nd heaviest interior defensive lineman in combine history, but it was already known he was a big guy, so no harm, no foul. He had survived that scare and he was ready to take on the draft. But only a few weeks before draft night, it was reported that Sweat was arrested and charged with a DWI after officers responded to a crash and discovered that he was under the influence. All of a sudden, the concerns came back. Many criticized him for his poor decision making to even find himself in that situation only a few weeks before the biggest moment of his life, and tied in this new incident back to his old reputation as a frequent partier who couldn't control his weight and wasn't dedicated enough to developing his craft. Alongside all the off-field concerns, there were concerns about his value. At his weight, he was likely only going to be a rotational player, and in college he rotated on and off the field, so there were questions about his conditioning. Analysts didn't love how he was inconsistent on the field, sometimes flashing moments of dominance, and other times being completely absent. There were also concerns about the inherent value of his position, as he's slated to primarily play nose tackle and eat up gaps, which is not really a position often valued this high in the draft unless the player is truly elite. The concerns about the value of his position, plus the value of his rotational role, combined with his off-field problems, have led some to criticize this pick as a major mistake or one of the largest reaches in the draft. Even after that, many analysts find it even more problematic that Sweat was picked by the Titans and will be right near Nashville. An excellent party area, if I do say so myself, and I do. So, how could the Titans possibly justify this? I mean, this guy got a DWI like 2 weeks before the draft. Alright, well stop being so damn judgmental. Hear both sides of the story first. Let's talk about the off-field stuff first, because while all the consensus analysts are on the outside looking in speculating about Sweat's maturity, the Titans have boots on the ground. learning everything about this guy. The Titans reportedly appreciated how Sweat was transparent about the situation and owned up to his mistake. They also thought, outside of the incident, that he had a great personality. They even went to visit with his entire family, having conversations with them about how it would take all of them, the team, the family, and Sweat himself, for Sweat to reach his full potential. Although we can't know about what those conversations entailed, the Titans have outright said that based on these conversations, they felt comfortable making the pick. But we obviously can't concern how he plays on the field too. Although Sweat was not known to be a very effective pass rusher for his collegiate career, he had significant improvement in his 5th year. Out of all DTs in the NCAA with over 400 pass rushing snaps, Sweat's 85.3 PFF pass rushing grade was 8th in the nation, and his 15.3% pass rush win rate was 6th. He did all of that as a pass rusher, while also having the nation's best run defense grade with a 92, and coming up with 31 tackles, which tied for 16th amongst interior defensive linemen. On top of elite collegiate production, he's massive. As we discussed, he's the 2nd heaviest interior defensive lineman measured in combine history, but he also moves extremely well for his size, showing an excellent mix of both power and quickness to win in both phases of the game. For this reason, the Titans believe Sweat isn't just a rotational nose tackle. Instead, they think he's a 3-down player that can line up all over the defensive line, as he did at Texas. You just don't find guys at his weight that move like he does with his production, so you take them early while you can. And for such a rare player, his position in this draft class was correspondingly rare, as if the Titans hadn't taken Sweat here, it would have been really difficult to not reach on another player who could fill the nose tackle position for them, since there just weren't many available. So, there's both sides to Sweat's story. Was he worth the reach against the consensus board in your opinion, or do you think it was too risky? Let me know below. In the meantime, we'll move on to our next player, who's going to be a lot of fun to discuss, and that's not just because he has a funny name. We're talking Clemson defensive lineman Ruke Orhorhoro, who is ranked as the 67th overall player on the consensus big board, making him a 3rd round pick. In the NFL draft, the Atlanta Falcons traded up to get him and took him at number 35 overall in the 2nd round, resulting in a consensus reach of 32 picks. So we'll discuss the value in a second, but so much hatred for this pick comes from the fact that the Falcons traded up and then took Ruke over Jer'Zhan Newton, a member of our top 20 fallers, who was in the discussion for DT1 and a consensus 1st round pick. I made this point in the last video, but we'll definitely need to revisit who winds up being the better player because of the amount of discussion there's been about Ruke being taken over Newton. But now let's turn to value, because Ruke was rarely ever considered to be an early 2nd rounder. Why? Consensus analysts thought that he was a player who had a lot of development to do, especially as a pass rusher, where the main gripe with him was that he needed to develop a more diverse moveset to shed blocks, rather than relying primarily on his athleticism to win. There were also questions about his instincts, his ability to disengage from blockers in the run game, and how he fit into the defense because his size and skill set made him kind of a tweener. On that last point, analysts are concerned because Ruke doesn't really have the pass rush skill set or the quickness to play off the edge or at 3 technique, but he also doesn't really have the ability to anchor against double teams to play further inside on the defensive interior. A common summary of Ruke was that he just wasn't really much more than a developmental player with excellent traits. But excellent traits may be underselling it, as Ruke tested out as the 15th best defensive tackle of all time, earning a 9.92 RAS score, and with that, became the best testing interior defensive lineman in the 2024 NFL draft class. Additionally, although consensus analysts griped about Ruke's production mostly coming from an over-reliance on pure athleticism over technique, he did still produce in college. On 235 pass rushing snaps in 2023, he had 5 sacks, 4 quarterback hits, and 17 hurries. His 53 quarterback pressures since 2022 were the 4th most amongst DTs in the ACC. With the athletic traits to take a swing on and production, perhaps you could see why the Falcons would trade up. Paul doesn't, but maybe you do. Now we have Florida wide receiver Slick Rick Pearsall, who was ranked as a 2nd round pick, number 46 overall on the consensus big board, but he was taken 31st overall by the 49ers in the 1st round, resulting in a consensus reach of 15 spots. This was one of the most shocking picks of the 1st round. You see, if you're a loyal Jumbo Package fan, thank you by the way, you'll remember me discussing how deep this wide receiver class was in my video on the biggest storylines of the 2024 NFL Draft. One of the storylines was that there may be a record number of wide receivers picked in the first 2 rounds. When discussing that, I put forth a list of players who consensus believed had the best chance to be selected in the 1st round and the early 2nd round. First, we have the obvious 3, Marvin Harrison Jr., Neighbors, and Odunze. Then we have the late 1st to early 2nd wide receivers, Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, and Xavier Legette. Save for Thomas and Worthy, Pearsall was drafted above all of the wide receivers in that second group of names. And boy, were people surprised. Mel Kiper added the pick to his list of the most head-scratching picks. Critics called the pick indefensible, a reach by any objective measure, the most off-the-radar name to make it into the first round, and of course, the standard criticism, a reach. Why is everyone being so hard on this pick? As we'll see with a quarterback who you no doubt know will be discussed later in this video, it's a little bit to do with situation and value. Although this video is about value, we'll discuss the situation first, because it's relevant to why the 49ers selected him. Regardless of the player, many analysts hate that the 49ers selected a wide receiver with other positions of need on the board. Given that they have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey, but are struggling at interior offensive line and defensive back, it would have made more sense for them to go with a player like, for example, Iowa cornerback Cooper DeJean, or interior offensive lineman Jackson Powers-Johnson. Analysts are concerned that this was a desperation reach due to the team wanting to trade one of Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. You could hardly see a single analysis of this pick without a discussion of what this pick says about Ayuk or Deebo. Mostly Ayuk. Assuming they aren't traded, it's obviously going to be difficult for Pearsall to be worth the number 31 overall pick, given the competition for targets. But now we get to the value discussion, because even assuming one of them does get traded, Consensus still didn't like the value of the player. Essentially, Consensus believes that Pearsall is a slot-only player who can't play on the outside because he struggles against press, and he doesn't have the consistent speed to win over the top. Consensus, for the most part, viewed him as a guy who could be a reliable underneath separator from the slot, but who just didn't provide much after the catch and didn't have star potential, thus not making him worthy of a first-round pick. But now let's talk about the 49ers side. What made the Niners make this reportedly shocking pick? First, Pearsall is an excellent route runner who can create separation in the short and intermediate areas of the field with his nuance, route running IQ, and movement ability. He's got no wasted movement in and out of his breaks, he instantly snaps off his routes to leave DBs in the dust, and he's an expert salesman with his routes to play mind games with the DBs while running his routes. This explains why he did 98th percentile receiving grade versus single coverage. Although he's not the fastest guy in the world, and he won't be a consistent threat to win deep, his route running and movement sets him up well to win over the top because of how he uses his movement to convince DBs to commit their leverage downhill before he'll ultimately just explode past them and beat them vertically. But let's talk about this guy's hands because they're absolutely nuts. I'm sure all of you saw that catch by him versus Charlotte. Unfortunately, I can't show it here or else I'll get copyright stricken, but it's literally insane. That wasn't just a one-off either, as this guy's a crazy hands catcher and brings in everything thrown in his direction. Even when he could use his body to secure the catch, he doesn't. Everything is with his hands. He'll make tough catches over the middle and over the shoulder, and he does a great job tracking the ball too. His 3.6% drop rate over his career is crazy low, and his 5 dropped passes since 2020 are the fewest amongst Power 5 wide receivers, with at least 200 targets in that time frame. Lastly, he also tested super well. I'll throw the numbers on screen right now, but suffice it to say, this dude is no joke as an athlete. If the draft had gone as many expected, with many other guys I liked going in the first round, I was strongly considering taking Pearsall for the jumbo package team. Obviously that can't happen now, because he was taken before my pick. As you could tell, I'm partial to Pearsall, and if you couldn't tell, I wanted to make that known since this video is supposed to be objective, and I'm being admittedly biased in the Niners' favor here, so you can use that information to weigh my credibility on Pearsall. Although I like him, I'm not entirely sure if I would have taken him at 31, but I like the player and I wanted to throw it out there, and I see the argument on both sides. Anyways, Kyle Shanahan praised his ability to separate, both down the field and underneath. He praised his hands and his intelligence, as well as his route running. So it appears there's just a fundamental difference between how the Niners and Consensus view the player, and we'll have to check back in when we revisit. Next up is Alabama offensive lineman J.C. Latham, who is ranked number 18 overall on the Consensus Big Board, but he was taken by the Titans at number 7 overall, resulting in a reach of 11 spots. Although the numerical reach isn't that high, there's been a lot of discussion about Latham being a reach, so it needs to be included. People are extremely split on his skill set, as some analysts, including Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, had him as high as OT1, and then other analysts, such as Trevor Sikkema of PFF, had him at OT5. Now, it's always nice when we can find some common ground, and that can definitely be found here between both those who dislike the value and those who like the value. No one will argue that Latham is an extremely powerful player with great tools, as he is over 80th percentile arm length, massive hands, a great anchor to sit down at bull rushes, had shocking power in his hands, and the ability to drive defenders off the ball in the run game. This is why the Titans loved him so much, evidenced by the various things that the Titans staff has said about him since he's been drafted. Alongside being really powerful and having excellent size and arm length, Latham has a history of durability and a large amount of experience for his age, as he's made 27 consecutive starts at Alabama, despite only being 21 years old. In the eyes of the Titans, there really wasn't much not to like. So what did consensus analysts not like? I mean, you literally have some people calling him the worst value of any team drafting a non-quarterback in the first round. The number one criticism I've seen of Latham is his foot speed and athleticism, as there are concerns with his ability to stick in front of speed rushers who try and beat him to the edge or cross his face, as well as concerns about his ability to get out into space and lead block at the second level. On top of that, he was penalized a whopping 18 times in the past 2 seasons, which brings a lot of negative plays to the offense, as we've all seen that penalties by offensive linemen can be drive killers at times. Many consensus analysts also just think he has a lot more development to go in his technique, as he over or undersets too often, lowers his head into contact, and lunges into blocks. An additional concern for the Titans is that he'll be moving from right tackle to left tackle, although that doesn't really play that much into draft stock, as no one knew that would be happening when they ranked him on their pre-draft big boards, but it's still something to note. And at number 2, we have Oregon quarterback Bo Nix, ranked number 37 on the consensus big board, but taken number 12 overall in the first round by the Denver Broncos, resulting in a reach of 25 picks. This was one of the most common mock draft picks, as it just seemed to make sense. The Broncos had one of the worst quarterback rooms in the league after letting Russ walk, and Nix was a good fit for Peyton's system. However, just because it's a good fit doesn't mean that consensus liked the value, as Nix was widely regarded as a second rounder. Many mock drafts had the Broncos trading back and taking Nix, but in the NFL draft they stayed put at 12 and took him there. Consensus saw Nix as more of a second rounder, an older player with a high floor and a low ceiling that consensus had concerns with regarding his ability to elevate an offense. Regarding his age, Nix is 24 years old, and he's only 7 months younger than his new teammate, the MILF lover himself, Zach Wilson, who's played 3 years in the NFL. Regarding his actual play, in the eyes of consensus, Nix is a player who could functionally run the offense, but couldn't elevate it, and thus he wasn't really worth the 12th overall pick. In support of this argument, many analysts pointed to Oregon's offense and the fact that many of Nix's throws were made to his first read, that almost 30% of his passes were at or behind the line of scrimmage, and that a 6.8 yards per completion was the worst of the 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Additionally, consensus didn't believe that Nix had any elite traits. They believed that he was just average to slightly above average, with a good not great arm. Although Nix had a ton of experience, setting an NCAA record with 61 starts in 5 seasons, the concern was that he's already shown all that he has, and he's basically just going to be the same player that consensus considers him to be. A good quarterback who can run an offense with no elite tools, average playmaking ability, and no ability to elevate the offense. On the Broncos side of this, Sean Payton has already come out and said how much he loves Nix's intelligence, saying that as a quarterback with a lot of starting experience, Nix has picked up quickly on the installs. Payton was impressed with Nix's dedication to learning off the field and his efficiency on the field. Specifically, the Broncos gave homework to all the prospects that they met with the night before their meeting, and Nix reportedly impressed with his grasp of the materials. Alongside being very intelligent with a lot of starting experience, Nix was a Heisman Trophy finalist and led the FBS with a 77.4% passer rating, completing 364 of 470 passes. His accuracy has led many to compare him to Drew Brees, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in NFL history, and obviously the quarterback for the Saints for most of Sean Payton's tenure. There's also pushback on the narrative that Nix isn't a playmaker, as he showed the ability to roll out of the pocket and make plays on the run, and the athleticism to pick up easy yards. Considering the way that the Broncos viewed him, as a player of supreme intelligence and work ethic, with excellent accuracy and the ability to play outside the pocket, it's no wonder that they viewed him as the 3rd best quarterback in this class, meaning that the Broncos had him ranked above either May or Daniels, depending upon whether you even want to believe this statement in the first place. The question is whether that perception of Nix is right. Is he just a 24-year-old game manager? Is he Peyton's next Brees? Or is he somewhere in between? And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, we finally get to what has been dubbed by many as the most shocking pick in the draft, even sometimes being called the most shocking pick ever in draft history. It's Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr., who was ranked number 34 on the consensus big board, but was drafted at number 8 overall by the Atlanta Falcons, making him a consensus reach of 26 spots. This pick is one of the most criticized of the entire draft. Falcons fans, we're going to discuss the consensus opinions first, but don't worry, we'll discuss both sides, so just wait it out for a second. So, from consensus's perspective, there's two major sources of criticism here: the player himself and the team who took the player. First, let's talk about the situation. This most recent offseason, the Falcons signed 36-year-old quarterback Kirk Cousins to a hefty 4-year, $180 million contract. This move signaled that the Falcons were all in on this year, looking to find a quarterback to utilize young talent such as Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson to lead this team to the playoffs and potentially the Super Bowl. There is no argument that can be made that signing a 36-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury for this price was not a short-term move. The Falcons held the number 8 overall pick, and the thought was that to advance their Super Bowl dreams this season, they'd take a high-level contributor to help shore up their defense. The draft fell perfectly for them, and they had their option of any defensive player on the board, and even offensive players if they'd like. Practically anyone who could make a year-one impact in a draft that was top-heavy with talent, and with a pick that was high up enough to take that talent before the draft class thinned out at many positions. Instead, we all know what happened. The Falcons took Michael Penix, a 24-year-old quarterback who, at the very least, will likely sit on the bench for 2 seasons to start his career, making him 26 years old by the time he'll be a full-time starter, if he even starts at that point. The criticisms on this point are that even forgetting player value, it just made no sense for the Falcons, who just made a hefty, short-term investment and have a good team, to use a premium pick in a top-heavy draft with their pick of any player on the board to take that pick and use it on an NFL-ready quarterback who didn't really need time to develop, and then relegate him to starting his career on the bench for 2 years. Taking Penix to sit on the bench for 2 seasons has the opportunity cost of not taking a player to aid a potential playoff run this season, and this was the number 8 overall pick. One where you can find a high-level contributor, especially for a team that was hurting on the defensive line. On top of that, they reportedly didn't tell Cousins ahead of time, and it pissed him off, hurting his relationship with the team only a month or 2 after he signed with them. On that basis alone, the Falcons have been chastised heavily for this pick. But now we get to the second point of criticism, which is mainly what this video is about: player value. Although there are some analysts that only dislike the pick because of the situation, and wouldn't have minded if a different team took Penix at 8, the majority of analysts dislike the value of taking Penix at 8, and would have found this to be a significant reach even if he was going to start year 1. I have the burden of proof here, so I just want to make sure that I'm meeting my burden of proof to say that the second perspective is the one taken by the majority of analysts. So let's do a fun little exercise.
Go to NFLmockdraftdatabase.com, go to Michael Penix Jr. on the consensus big board, and you'll see on the site that he's ranked as the consensus 31st player. We have him as the 34th player because we took the average of 3 different consensus big boards. Once you go to the site, go to page 19, you'll see the start of the big board rankings for draft day, April 25th. It's page 19 because the 19 pages before it are all mock drafts, not big board ranking. On the bottom of the first page, where the mock draft entries stop and the big board entries begin, you'll see 6 big boards. There you can see that only one analyst, Jeremy Purnell of Sports Illustrated, has Penix within the top 20, placing him as number 11 on the board. Only 2 of these 6 place Penix in the first round. Let's go to the next page now. On this page, there are 35 more entries. Of them, only 1 places Penix in the top 10, and 16 places him in the first round as a whole. Only taking the entries that we got to the draft, there are 15 more on the next page. 0 of them place Penix in the top 10, and 3 of them place Penix in the first round. So the total here is that on 56 big boards, Penix was in the top 10 in only 1 of them, and he was in the first round in only 21 of them. That means 35 of the 56 big boards had him at best as a second rounder. For fun, I counted how many had him ranked as the 50th player or above, and that number was 15 big boards.
Okay, so I've made my point. Most analysts didn't value Penix at number 8 overall. But why? Penix just turned 24 years old, has played 6 seasons of college ball, and in those 6 seasons he's torn his ACL twice and had 2 shoulder surgeries. Alongside concerns about his age and injury history, a lot of analysts just didn't love the tape because they felt that he wasn't dynamic enough to make plays out of structure, he didn't have good pocket presence, didn't play well under pressure, and struggled to throw the ball to the middle of the field. Many of Penix's harshest critics pointed to the fact that Penix was also surrounded by 3 highly drafted receivers, an offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award, and a play caller who just got promoted to an NFL gig. For consensus analysts, it was all of these issues or a combination of them that made him not worth the number 8 pick overall in their eyes. So with all the issues we just discussed, what is the possible justifications for the Falcons drafting him? It's inconceivable, right? Well, clearly not, since somebody did it. In discussing the pick, Terry Fontenot stated the following, quote, "If you believe in a quarterback, you have to take him. And if he sits for 4 or 5 years, that's a great problem to have because we're doing so well at that position. So it's as simple as if you see a guy you believe in at that position, you have to take him. We do something else right here, and then we win for the next few seasons, and then Kirk decides to hang up the cleats, whenever that is, then Michael Penix is somewhere playing at a really high level, and we're in quarterback purgatory. We don't have a quarterback." End quote. Now on the surface, these quotes may not mean much to you, but let's analyze them in the context of the quarterback scene as a whole and the rest of their draft. It is non-debatable at this point that quarterback is the most important position in the game. Without one, you face a real uphill battle. As discussed, number 8 is a premium pick to get a high-level player. In theory, a top 10 player in the draft. However, with Kirk Cousins at the helm, the goal is that the team will not be picking at number 8 again when they have a quarterback need, causing an immediate decline as soon as Cousins retires and no answers to replace him. The logic here was that while they had the chance to use a top 10 pick to take a shot on a high-level player at the most important position, they might as well take it because they didn't anticipate being back in that spot, and they believed Penix had the talent to be an elite quarterback. The Falcons also spent their next picks throwing darts at the defensive line to try and fix the need with a number of different players, hoping that one of them could potentially fill the hole without having to spend the number 8 pick on that player. In theory, it's not really completely horrible. Would I have done it myself? Not for Penix, but I could see a world in which I'm maybe in the exact same scenario. Perhaps a prospect comes along that I think is like the next Pat Mahomes and the rest of the league is sleeping on him, and I just think, I gotta go get him, because this is the most important position and we could be set up for years to come. So that's what these quotes say to me. Fontenot believed in Penix, he was in the position to take him, didn't want to be stuck in quarterback purgatory after Cousins retired, and he pulled the trigger and then tried to clean up the team's defensive line need later in the draft by throwing multiple picks at it. Although he wasn't valued as a top 10 player, this is a guy who led Washington to the college football playoff, so he's not just some scrub. The debate between consensus and the NFL on Penix will by far be the most interesting to follow from this draft class. Will he be a reach, or will he live up to the expectations such that he overcomes that label? And with that, we're done here. This video took a ton of research and time to put together, as well as everything else from this draft season, so I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe, as it lets me know that you guys enjoy the content. Otherwise, I'd love to know if there's anyone you guys thought that I missed. We'll be revisiting this in the future, so let me know below if there are some players that you'd like me to check back in on that are not on this list. But remember, on the second channel, there are 10 more reaches for the guys who didn't quite make the final cut for this video, so there are 20 reaches that I'll be revisiting. Otherwise, that's about it, guys. Later.